When you hear the name Roswell, you probably picture glowing green heads on cheap t-shirts and novelty roadside diners. That tourist trap folklore serves a highly effective purpose. It makes it incredibly easy to ignore the people who originally sounded the alarm. These original witnesses were not amateur stargazers or conspiracy theorists. The official government narrative handed to the public in 1947 was decidedly mundane. The military claimed the mysterious wreckage was simply a downed standard weather balloon. But the men collecting the debris in the New Mexico desert that summer reported retrieving materials that actively defied the known physics of the era. We are left with a massive gap in the historical record. On one side, a simple weather balloon. On the other, the sworn testimony of highly trained specialists holding physical proof that defied classification. To figure out what really happened, we have to audit the credentials of the men on the ground. The personnel stationed at the 509th Bomb Group in Roswell were the military's top tier. These were the men tasked with handling the world's first atomic weapons. Their background was not in general infantry. They were elite graduates of the Army's Air Force Training Command, rigorously educated in cutting-edge aerospace engineering. Their daily operations revolved entirely around advanced radar technology and the precise mechanics of aviation crash retrieval. They spent their careers analyzing mangled fuselages and tracking foreign surveillance tools. If a classified Soviet spycraft or an experimental domestic rocket went down, this specific unit was trained to identify its components on site. These experts picked through the debris field and found materials they could not recognize. A unit explicitly trained to catalog every piece of known aviation technology, failing to identify standard weather balloon foil or balsa wood, severely undermines the possibility of a routine accident. The anomalous metal and foil, however, were secondary. The most startling evidence recovered from the site was the biological entities inside the craft. A standard high-speed aviation crash historically results in extreme physical trauma and dismemberment. Yet the military recovery teams reported finding distinct, largely intact biological forms among the debris. The forensic accounts detailed by the retrieval teams described proportions that immediately confused the medical personnel on site. This diagram compares the typical proportions of a 1940s test pilot to the recorded descriptions of the crash victims. Witnesses consistently describe the entities as uniquely short in stature, standing barely 4 feet tall. The biological deviations continued upward. Reports noted an expanded cranial capacity and absent facial features, specifically lacking standard auditory and olfactory structures. Faced with an anatomy that completely lacked conventional human markers, the military personnel resorted to a highly specific term in their internal descriptions. They categorized the bodies as otherworldly. The official explanation later claimed the recovery teams had simply found anthropomorphic test dummies. The highly detailed forensic accounts of distinctly short, otherworldly biological structures rule out the possibility of misidentified wooden or rubber mannequins. With the debris field cleared and the bodies secured, Command faced an immediate logistical crisis: how to hide physical evidence of this magnitude from the local population. They enacted a sweeping confiscation protocol. Military police scoured the surrounding ranches, physically removing every scrap of unusual material from civilian hands under threat of severe penalty. Inside the base, the quarantine of information was absolute. The very personnel who had collected the evidence were brought in, debriefed, and strictly ordered to never discuss the true nature of the materials again. What began as a frantic weekend of damage control rapidly solidified into decades of institutional silence. The original press release was retracted within hours, replacing the physical reality the soldiers witnessed with the sanitized weather balloon story. The military utilized its own strict chain of command to enforce this silence. By threatening the pensions and freedom of their own elite personnel, high-ranking officials successfully buried the credibility of the primary witnesses. Decades later, men who had been at the site reached the end of their lives and began to break their silence, finally detailing the rigid protocols used to unmask the 60-year cover-up. Whether the bodies recovered in the desert were truly extraterrestrial visitors or the subjects of a highly classified, deeply unethical human experiment, the physical evidence confirms one absolute fact: the 1947 official government record is a lie. The enduring chill of the Roswell incident lies in how efficiently a governing body can confiscate physical evidence, silence elite experts, and overwrite reality with a weather balloon.